Like that, of course, the Persons of the Year, the African Leadership Magazine Persons of the Year, is an annual event. And to know more about the event, actually, or more about the awards, I think it's important we first, find out or query the formation of African Leadership Magazine and the reason for the founding, why we founded the African Leadership Magazine. So basically, Dr. Ken Giami, the publisher of African Leadership Magazine, a Pan-Africanist and one who understands the dangers in a single narrative, a single story, thought it wise that the trite headline coming out of Africa, which is hunger, war, and famine, needed, to be checked, to be challenged by posing something entirely and truthful about the continent, and that's why, of course, the African Leadership Magazine was founded by Dr. Ken Giami. And afterwards, we realized, of course, that there's a need for us to, beyond the publications, to also put together a program or an event, so to speak, that celebrates Africans, of course, the leadership across the continent that is doing very well. Of course, the Persons of the Year is one of those kind of platforms that we celebrate purposeful leadership from the continent. So yes, this year, of course, the Persons of the Year is the 8th edition, and what you have this year is Africans from different from the east, the west, the north, and south, and of course Africans in diaspora coming together to choose for themselves who they feel should be honored across 7 categories. And it starts, of course, in this last quarter of every year, sometime in October, where you have we put out what they call the call for nominations. Now, this call for nomination is actually designed to allow Africans, choose who should be included across these categories. And most times we receive, nominations in excess of about 200 to 250 people, sending in names and saying, look, this young man or this gentleman has done very well in the area of education. He's done very well in the area of, job creation. He's done exceptionally well in the area of let's say, politics, as it were. So these names, of course, are reviewed, and of course, with the documents submitted often via emails and our social media platforms, then we, of course, narrow the numbers down to possibly about 3 to 4 names per category. And when these names are narrowed down, of course, we go through another round of voting, which, of course, is what just ended on the 10th of December. Now, the poll ran for about a few weeks, 2.5 weeks to be precise, where Africans in diaspora, Africans within the continent, were casting their vote on our website, and of course employing people who had felt, of course, who believe in the war.
All right. Sorry to interrupt you, but we don't have a lot of time. So what I'd like us to do is actually move on to some of the winners that have been voted for by the public, both in Africa and in the diaspora. And I see that the winner is somebody that was in South Africa recently and at a big the African banking event.
Okay, yes. Of course, I'm sure you're talking about Dr. Adesina. Yes, of course, you would agree with me that the world is celebrating Dr. Adesina. He's one of the, he's the winner of the African of the Year in that category. And of course, when you see since he came on board as the head, as the president of African Development Bank, there has been consistent growth. And of course, you would also agree with me that I think it was just yesterday that there was an announcement, a major announcement of an additional $7.2 billion that have been that have come into the bank from donors to help support, of course, fragile economies in the continent. That's about 32% growth. Growth from the the target that they've set themselves. This themselves. That shows you the remarkable work that him and his team are doing of course, in the African Development Bank. That's just, of course, one of the winners. We also have others in different categories.
All
We
right,
have in the
let's
job
go.
creation.
Let's
We
go
have
to
in the
the
leadership.
female leadership, because I'm also happy to see that female leadership is recognised, and there was a worthy winner there. Tell us about her.
Oh well, Mrs. Mansour, Roya Mansour, of course, an amazing woman, a successful business woman who was actually to also pursue some very laudable patents in the area of agriculture, in the area of climate action, in the area of environment. All these were designed, of course, to see how she would leave her footprints in the sands of time. She's, of course, in the past 10 years, she's consistently spoken against climate issues and the need for much more for Africans to be invited to the table to put their to lend their voice to climate discourse. And she's not just done that; she's moved on to also find a way of patenting some of the discoveries that she's made in the area of actually improving yields for agriculture and among other things that she's been able to do. And you will agree with me, of course, that she's remained an inspiration for women, especially for a continent like ours that really is lagging behind in terms of women, gender issues and discourse. So we felt putting her forward would also encourage other women to know that there is much more. The continent is opening up to them, and we trust and believe that, of course, they can contribute meaningfully towards the growth of the continent. Of course, that's why she's been put forward, and of course we're quite happy because it recorded a massive vote and support all around the continent and beyond.
Okay, let's move on a bit more, and there's another name that we recognize here in South Africa because he's just set up a factory in KwaZulu-Natal manufacturing mobile phones, and that's Ashish Thakkar, is the Person of the Year Employment Generation.
Yes, Ashish Thakkar, of course, you will agree with me, has an amazing story. A young man who started who's gone on to do amazing things in the continent, moved on from some of the early startups that is done in the ICT and real estate, and of course, he's gone on to do us proud by setting up the first smartphone factory. He did so in Kigali. He did so in South Africa. Only recently, we've just found out that the factory, which is just about 2 or 3 months old, is already employing about over 200 young Africans across, that's direct employment. That's just for Kigali alone, for Rwanda alone, when we've not even included what's happening in South Africa. That's to show you, of course, that these are numbers that, especially because unemployment is a major issue in the continent. And of course, he's not just doing that with his own company. He's the chair of a committee set up by the African Development Bank, the president of the African Development Bank, to help promote job creation in the continent. And their target is to create about 50 million jobs in the next couple of years.
All right. So another name that we recognize, particularly here in South Africa and across the continent, is Patrice Motsepe. He got an award for the charity work that he does.
Yes, of course. Motsepe, his foundation has been involved in supporting young people over a long period of time, and he's done an amazing work. And it's not all the time. Of course, we know that charity in the continent is something that is innate and something that is that has become second nature to Africans. But of course, it's not all the time that you find people who put up a structured platform to help give back to society. He's not just done that with his foundation. He has moved on to pledge, giving back, nearly over half of his fortune to charity in the course of his lifetime. That is something that is worthy of emulation, and we're encouraging, because it's not all the time that you find people on the same equal footing or pedestrian with everyone. So we must build a society solidarity in the continent that supports others who are not able to, who are not on the same, trajectory with us in terms of financial rewards.
All right. So one choice that some people might say, hang on, this might be a surprise, or perhaps it isn't, the Person of the Year political leadership. We saw the President or the Prime Minister of Ethiopia getting a Nobel Peace Prize just this past week, and yet you've chosen the Egyptian President. Tell us about that choice. I guess it's a poll, but was it close?
Yeah. Well, it was a close, you would agree with me if you saw the poll. It was a closely contested poll, and there are other nominees in that category. But it might interest you to know that among his peers, the president of Egypt, President El-Sisi, has actually been he's been one man that has stood and had led the charge in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and he's championed that cause because he understands that that's where, of course, there are a lot of promises, there are a lot of potentials that lies therein for Africa as a continent. It might also interest you to know that, of course, just recently, I think ended today or yesterday, the Aswan, conference, a summit in Egypt that brought together African presidents, from the continent to discuss sustainable development in the continent, economic growth and sustainable development in the continent. That shows you that it's a man that is, very particular, is Pan-Africanist in nature, is very particular about the growth of the continent. And of course, whenever we find people like that, because it is not even African Leadership Magazine that decides, you now see why everyone rallied behind him, to see that he gets that endorsement. I think there is no better. Last year it was we actually honored the Prime Minister of Ethiopia before the Nobel Committee. But of course, this year Africans decided that it should go to President El-Sisi.
All right, and I just wonder. Next year, in February, I believe, they'll all be coming here to South Africa to receive these awards in person. So it should be a big celebration.
Also, a very big celebration. That, of course, we would also have SABC fully represented, because they will all be in South Africa. And beyond, of course, the presentation of the award, we're going to be talking about job and wealth creation, security across the continent. So it's a major event that just, that looks critically at most of the or some of the challenges that we face in the continent before the award presentation. So it's going to be a very big event, and we're hopeful that so much will come out of that engagement as we begin the next decade.
All right, Mr.